Final Fantasy VI holds a special place in my heart. It was the first classic JRPG I've ever played, and one of the first Eastern games that I've ever experienced that had deeply structured characters and stories. For this reason, and also due to its sheer quality, Final Fantasy VI is my favorite game of the series, and also one of my favorite games ever, easily in my top 10 and probably my top 5. Despite the unorthodox structure of the narrative, the characters, themes, and personal journeys explored in this game's story truly spoke to me. I won't get into why the game works so well here, however. Instead, I'd like to draw attention to one of Final Fantasy VI's biggest assets, and one of the most popular characters in the series. This insanity-ridden psycho clown is thought of as such an impressive villain for his unpredictability, his devastatingly brutal acts of cruelty, his sheer entertainment value, and just how delightfully evil he is. The comparisons that get brought up between Kefka and the Joker are not far off on the surface. Both are similar aesthetically, both are malevolently entertaining in their savagery, and both are agents of chaos. Kefka is maniacal, short-tempered, and ironically charismatic through his dark humor and one-liners. It's easy to see why people are drawn to his character. But Kefka goes much deeper than being maniacal for the sake of it, and this is something that went over my head the first time I played Final Fantasy VI. He is so entertaining and effective as a villain because of his sheer, unrelenting hatred of the world, but a lot of that hatred is expanded upon in subtext throughout the game. At his raw core, Kefka is a terribly tragic character, and his cackling, maniacal clown persona is a mask that hides his true self and desires. And most interestingly for me, a mask that he puts on for his own twisted entertainment that just solidifies his hatred of humanity. I should note that some of the things that I say in this video are backed up by fact, but a good deal of it is down to calculated interpretation, so keep that in mind. Some of this is purely my opinion on the character, and I'm not stating that any of this is carved in stone. Our introduction to the character of Kefka, slightly through Terra's memories but more prominently in the desert near Figaro Castle, displays the man as a bit of a simplistic agent of chaos and entropy, and the way his characterization is maintained throughout the early and middle acts of the story made him seem like a shallower villain than I should have given him and the story credit for. He is introduced quite indelicately, which was effective in showing the player what he was all about right from the beginning, but this introduction also hid the intricacies of his character. Thus, when we get to some of the deeper moments in which the lesser emphasized aspects of his character are displayed, I admit that I kind of glazed over them with my mind stuck in Kefka is just pure insanity and that's all there is to it mode. This is how I viewed the character on my first playthrough, and judging from what I've seen in comments and on message boards, I wasn't alone. But the story definitely hints at a more complex and more intelligent characterization for Kefka. These hints are just clouded by the player's initial perception of the man. Let me elaborate. In Kefka's past, he was Emperor Gestal's trusted right-hand man, more or less a completely normal person, nothing like what we see in the game. Years and years before the events of Final Fantasy VI, research into Magitek technology was in full swing and not nearly as developed as we see from the game. In the development process for powers and technology like this, tests must be done to bring about the desired end result, and Kefka was the literal first test subject for Magitek technology. This experiment was just that, an experiment, and so the process had not yet been perfected. Due to this, Kefka's mind was disturbed and his sanity, morals, and essence of self were completely lost for the sake of an experiment. He then quickly became unhinged, cruel, and mad as his notoriety grew throughout the kingdom. He became a figurehead for the Gestalian Empire, along with Gestal himself and General Leo, who interestingly enough contrasted the other two very well and offered another perspective in shades of grey to certain aspects of the Empire. Kefka has a gaping hole in his soul. He is absolutely broken, but his behaviors throughout the game deceive both the player and the characters of Final Fantasy VI of his true feelings. The clown persona is a literal and metaphorical mask for what Kefka really is. After the results of the experiment, Kefka quickly harbored a hatred of humanity and their relentless stupidity and optimism. He views the world as dark and twisted, and thinks that anyone who thinks otherwise is completely oblivious. So, he plays a little game with the world through his clown act in the majority of Final Fantasy VI. And the results of this game both highly amuse and infuriate him. He plays up the clown thing. The insanity, the dancing around, the cackling, the whimsy, because he knows that humans are lazy and stupid and quick to label. And sure enough, everyone in this setting has no problem believing that Kefka's true self is this clown. Kefka is proven correct by his estimations, and he finds this both hilarious and incredibly agonizing. This is literally demonstrated when he points out to some grunt soldiers that his boots are dirty, and then they rush to clean them. Note that he does not tell them to clean them. He just points out that they're dirty, and the soldiers then clean. Kefka then simply laughs, and proceeds to angrily call the men idiots, clearly displaying his two primary feelings on mankind. Kefka finds this behavior hilariously aggravating. He hates it. The passivity, the lack of pride, the sheer stupidity of these people, he absolutely hates it. He just resents humanity so much for their idiocy, yet finds amusement in it. Kefka finds existence itself to be painful due to this. There is a sad desolation to his situation that I find to be quite thought-provoking. A lot of people think of Kefka as unpredictable, but I really don't think that he is. If you view his character in this way, a lot of his actions start to make sense. The story moves on, and we are introduced to a different side of Kefka through one of his biggest moments yet, the poisoning of Doma. During this siege, Kefka literally poisons the river and kills nearly everyone in the castle, reveling in the screams from the suffering. Here we see a much more sinister side to the man. Before, he did not really come off as truly threatening, but through the poisoning of Doma, Kefka displays his pure malice for people. He just doesn't care about their lives. The pure evil of this heinous act is beautifully explored as we see the situation from the perspective of Cyan, a man deeply and tragically affected by this incident. The poisoning of Doma shows the player that Kefka is much more than an insane clown man. He is dark, he is dangerous, he is ruthless, and he is reflecting some of the darkness that he sees in the world back on itself. I should note that all of these darker aspects of Kefka's character are based completely on the Western release and English translation of Final Fantasy VI. From what I've read, the original Japanese story had a somewhat lighter, more childlike Kefka as opposed to a dark, brutal, sadistic nihilist that we see. It becomes clear that Kefka has a long-term vision, the destruction of this sad excuse for a race. He plans to do this by harnessing the power of Magicite and Espers, resurrecting and disrupting the Warring Triad, and bringing destruction upon the world. We soon get to a point in the story where Kefka is imprisoned by Gestal as part of a plan in order for Gestal to gain the trust of the Returners. The plan works. Kefka is sprung from jail, kills General Leo and the Espers as well. Kefka raises the floating continent and proceeds to put the Warring Triad out of alignment and bring forth the world of ruin, after killing his former friend, Gestal, which hammers home his isolation. Kefka then drains the Warring Triad of their power and achieves godhood. He sits back and watches the stupid ants that he has grown to despise and enjoy struggle helplessly against the dark tide that is this horrifying new world. At this point, he has achieved the first part of his plan, and this plan and these actions are not the actions of a mindless madman. Kefka is cunning and intelligent, and mixing these traits with his unrelenting hatred and brutality makes for a truly horrifying villain, yet one that is still very deep when the nihilistic themes about purpose, or the lack thereof, and life are analyzed with relation to his character. It's here where some extrapolation is used on my part to pick apart Kefka's development and psyche at this part of the story, as we don't actually see much of him during the World of Ruin segment until the final battle. Any conclusions that I make here are based on the context of Kefka's situation, his actions at the final battle, and what may have led to that behavior. Throughout the early acts of the story, Kefka displayed hints of nihilism, but these hints were overshadowed by his loud persona that he carries throughout the narrative, and a simple lack of care regarding others' lives. As we get to the climax of the story, however, Kefka's nihilism grows stronger and stronger, and his clown persona begins to fade as he sits atop his lonely tower that he has erected as a monument and tribute to the pointlessness of existence. He gains followers who worship him, probably more out of fear than anything else, and I would hazard to guess that this saddened and irritated him even further, as the parallels between these new followers and the grunts that cleaned his shoes so long ago are clear. Also, Kefka probably used this time to sadly, perhaps subconsciously reflect on the fact that he killed Gestal, which could have easily fueled his nihilistic ideologies. Although this man was far from a great friend of Kefka's, he was at a time his right-hand man and a reminder of the time in Kefka's life that was much less lonely and much more joyful. I don't know for sure if Kefka was capable of consciously or even subconsciously pondering these things, but it makes sense in my eyes, and all of this would explain his changed demeanor in the game's final climax. If you study the story closely, you'll notice that in the rare moments in the game where Kefka is truly speaking from the heart, he completely sheds his clown persona. As the returners confront Kefka at the end of the game, he proclaims that all humans are insignificant, their lives, their emotions, and their love completely devoid of any and all meaning. And it is clear that this is one of the few times that he is speaking from the heart. He cannot fathom any purpose in this world, and thus wants to leave no trace of its existence. The returners then argue back, stating that they have found joy and purpose through love and friendship in this world, and Kefka is absolutely maddened by this, partly because he can't understand or relate to this, and partly because he so wishes he could. He is loneliness incarnate, and it becomes clear at this point. And he no longer cares about anything. He then says that he has decided to erase all of life itself, perhaps partly due to a jealousy that he cannot relate to these purposeful people. But the interesting thing here is that Kefka has had the power to destroy the world for a year at this point. If he truly felt a purpose in the destruction of the world in his heart of hearts, wouldn't he have done it already? He puts on his clown persona one last time and laughs maniacally once more, but it is so different from the confident display of the clown mask from earlier in the game. This time the clown is desperate, cracked, almost as if Kefka is trying to prove as much to himself as he is to the returners that he is unbothered by all of this, when the polar opposite is true. This laugh, the full final battle, and the death of Kefka is a part of Kefka's character arc that I view as one huge downward spiral, and an extended and final cry for help in Kefka's twisted way. And then, he dies. Not laughing, not loudly, but in silence, perhaps even content at the prospect of eternal rest. It is a terrific conclusion to a terrific villain, and one that is just a bit sad if you ponder its meaning and significance. Now, I'm not saying that we should forgive or even sympathize with Kefka when you look at the despicable things that he did, but I just wanted to draw attention to the subtler aspects of this villain. He is much deeper than some give him credit for, and all that he represents juxtaposes the party of protagonists that we grow to love and learn about, tragically and beautifully, as we see that our heroes have everything that Kefka always craved, but never obtained. As I said, a lot of this nuance went over my head when I first played Final Fantasy VI, but it is clear to me now that Kefka is so much more than a simple clown bent on destruction. He is not only a fantastic character, but his downward spiral of a character arc allowed the prominent contrasting themes of the narrative to shine all the brighter. Final Fantasy VI communicates ideas of perseverance against all odds, camaraderie, determination, love, and friendship, to name just a few, and ends on quite a high emotional note. But absolutely none of the story's ending impact would have been possible without Kefka. If you jot down a bunch of bullet points of Kefka's character and his actions, then he can indeed come off as simplistic and one-dimensional. Crazy, Check. Hates all of humanity? Check. Wants to destroy all of creation? Check. But it is in the reasoning behind these motives where Kefka shines as a villain. Kefka is not a shallow and simple plot device, but almost a deconstruction of one, with subtle and warped justification behind it all, triggered by an experiment gone wrong. His characterization, achieved through subtle character moments and subtext throughout the story, is stellar, and he is absolutely one of my favorite villains of all time. Thanks very much for watching. Feel free to comment on your thoughts of Kefka, Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy villains, or just the series in general. And please let me know if you like seeing Final Fantasy content on this channel. It would really help me going forward. Thanks once again, and see you next time.